Order, please. We will start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Please remain standing following the Pledge of Allegiance. Will be a silent moment of reflection. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And thank you. And we will move on to a reading of the notice, please.
The adjourned annual meeting of the Marathon County Board of Supervisors, composed of 38 members, will convene at the Marathon County Courthouse Assembly Room, 500 4th Street, Wausau, on Thursday, February 20th, 2025. The agenda was duly signed and posted.
Thank you. I would like to request everyone silence your cell phones and any other electronic devices as to not to be an interruption to the meeting, and I thank you for your indulgence. And we'll move on to roll call. I'd ask everyone, please sign in to roll call. Thank you. I'd like to welcome all of the visitors that we have with us this evening in the audience, and also the viewing audience that is viewing remote. And thank you for your interest in county government. We'll move on to item B, educational presentations and/or reports. Item 7, standing committee chairpersons or designees. Any reports by standing committee chairpersons or their designees? Okay, we will move on to the consent agenda. Items, Supervisor Robinson.
I would request that item 12C7 be pulled from the consent agenda.
Okay, item 12C7 has been pulled, and the remainder is from C8 through items C13B1, excluding item 12C7. What is your pleasure? Motion by Supervisor Drabek, seconded by Supervisor Zhang. Any discussion on the consent agenda? Again, excluding item 12C7, which is from the Public Safety Committee, the increase of the medical examiner's fee. Any discussion? Okay, seeing none, we will proceed to vote. And we'll proceed. And the motion is carried and is unanimous. Thank you. And we will proceed on to now item 12C7 from Public Safety Committee, increase the medical examiner's fees as permitted by state statute, ordinance 0-11-25. Motion by Mask and second by Supervisor Zhang. Any discussion? Supervisor Robinson, please.
It's been brought to my attention that we need an effective date for the resolution, so I would move to amend the resolution to incorporate an effective date of April 1st, 2025.
Okay, let me have the clerk get the amendment in. The clerk already has the amendment in. What is the pleasure? We've got to move to allow to vote. Motion in a second. But that's like I need a motion in a second on the amendment. Oh yeah, you can't. Yeah. Okay. Okay, Supervisor Robinson with a motion and seconded by Supervisor Langenhan to have an effective date on the increase of the medical examiner's fee to be April 1, 2025. Any discussion on the amendment? Okay, seeing none, we'll proceed to vote on the amendment to make the effective date April 1, 2025. And we'll proceed. And the motion is carried and is unanimous. Thank you. Now, back to the motion, the increasing the medical examiner's fee as amended, including the April 1, 2025 effective date. Any discussion? Any discussion? Okay, seeing none, we'll proceed to vote. Supervisor Lemmer.
My vote is aye.
Thank you. Vote is aye. And we'll proceed. And the motion is carried and is unanimous. Thank you. We will move on to items. First, I got to update the board. Items D, 14, and 15 were pulled in working with the chair because the task force is extended exclusively till April 1st, 2025. The chair and will be reaching out to members if they want to get the input from the business community and individuals, and because we were unable to actually locate individuals specifically willing to come into the task force at this late of time. So we'll move on to item D, 16, and that is to appoint Supervisor Nicholas Endres to the airport board. What is your pleasure? Motion by Supervisor. Why am I still? Why am I? Motion by Supervisor Marash and seconded by Supervisor Drabeck. Is there any discussion? Any discussion? Okay, seeing none, we'll proceed to vote.
Aye for Ann Lemmer.
Yeah. Supervisor Conway? Aye. Supervisor Conway, aye. Thank you. And we'll proceed.
Supervisor Cavelli, aye.
Yep. Supervisor Covelli, aye. Now it's locked. And the motion is carried. And we are now down to resolutions from the Human Resources, Finance, and Property Committee. A resolution to approve expenditures to remediate the human health hazards at the former Northern Mobile Home Park located in Schofield, Wisconsin. Resolution 6-25. What is your pleasure? This is a two-thirds. Again, this is a budget amendment. This would be a two-thirds majority. Did you get a motion in a second? Motion by Supervisor Robinson and seconded by Supervisor Marash. Any discussion on the item to fund the expenditures needed for the remediation on the health hazards at the trailer park? All right, seeing none, we'll proceed to vote. And we'll proceed. And the motion is carried and is unanimous. Thank you. Item G19 from the Homelessness Task Force and Human Resources Finance and Property Committee. That resolution was pulled, by the Health and Human Services Committee Chair, Supervisor Boots, on 12/13, so that item is not there. We will move on to item G19 from the Homelessness Task Force and Human Resources Finance and Property Committee, resolution, and this is an update 12-25, a recommendation for funding for the shelter. Supervisor Robinson with the motion and Supervisor Seifelt with the second. Supervisor Wilhelm, please.
A question I have, with this being a collaboration with WASA, what happens if City of Mosinee, Abbotsford, Stratford, Edgar, somebody starts having problems? Are we going to, because the Marathon County is putting money towards this, so that would be considered a county issue. Are the people that need help going to be funneled to WASA, or is this going to be a different issue that we're going to be dealing with? That's the first question. I have one more. If somebody could answer that.
Well, I'd invite Chief, if there's no objection, Chief Barnes to be able to answer that question.
That's an issue today, yesterday, and for the last 2 years, and that's exactly what happens with those individuals. The other municipalities and townships throughout Marathon County, when they experience an individual that's unhoused in those areas, they're brought to where the resources are, which happen to be in the city of Wausau.
Okay, thank you. And one more, and so especially in these cold, extremely cold days, we're paying for this. If somebody is kicked out of the homeless shelter, what options do you have to house individuals like that?
So on these extremely cold days that reach 10 degrees below zero or colder with the wind chill, we activate what's called Community on Call, and that is, it expands the capacity of the shelter and utilizes other organizations, whether they be faith-based churches or Bridge Street Mission, expands capacity by 15. That has always given us enough capacity. And on those days where the temperature creates a health hazard, with rare exception, those bans are lifted during that period of time and they're provided shelter.
Okay, other discussion? Other discussion? Vice Chair Dickinson, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the initial concern I have is that what has been presented to us in these 2 pages was made available to us just a short period of time ago. It's significantly different than the resolution than what was provided to us last week. So we could spend a whole lot of time digging through all of the individual bullet points of this. And so maybe what I would request, and I see some other people are going to speak, I would look for an explanation for these changes before we vote on this. A couple concerns. We're talking about a funding source is the funding through the end of the year. We're talking about budgeting for next year in a discussion with the county administrator and the city of Wausau. We're talking about changes in capacity based upon the weather. We're talking about gender, which is listed in one bullet point. I just bring it up. We don't have an RFP. Let's see what else I got here. We don't have data showing how many rural individuals are brought here, although I've heard it multiple times. It was mentioned as a fallacy at one point. But if you don't have the data, how do we know? Are people actually bringing people from Stratford or Abbotsford to the city of Wausau? If they are, fantastic, if they can find a place, but what is the data? If you don't have the data, you can't just anecdotally state it. And so I would ask that the chair of the Homelessness Task Force and the chair of HR Finance explain some of these changes. Thank you.
And there are the next 2 individuals that have requested to speak. Supervisor Carvelli, please.
Thank you, Chair Gibbs, and thank you, Vice Chair Dickinson. I appreciate the feedback. One of the things that we learned recently was there were 10,500 night stays at the Good Shepherd Shelter over the previous year. 22 individuals typically at one point in time, and then 26 when it gets colder. One of the other asks, I believe, from the last meeting was that what's the business community private funding partnership in this endeavor? And at the last meeting yesterday, we found out that business community private funding partnership is $2.5 million annually. So they have a large stake in this endeavor. So one thing that we really like to cooperate with the city on is our partnership with them, saying that we do care about the homeless folks in Marathon County, as Wausau is part of Marathon County. We also want to be the healthiest, safest, most prosperous community in the county or in the state. We did put some verbiage in here about what an RFP would look like. And I think with Chief Barnes's expertise in writing up RFPs, he can probably explain that procedure a little better than I can. But it's, and when we talked about this yesterday, it's the chicken or the egg. So without the backing from the county and the city going alone at this, putting out that RFP, we're not partnering with the city anymore in that aspect if we don't pass this. I know my constituents care about homeless folks, making sure that they don't freeze on a park bench when there's no shelter available. I know that other people do as well. I've heard from other constituents that care about the homeless people and want to transition them. But the immediate need for 2025 is the emergency shelter and making sure that we have emergency shelter available for those folks. Was there any other questions, Chair Dickinson?
We'll go on to, we'll come back if there are additional questions, but we'll go on to Supervisor Robinson, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The reason that the amendment is before you tonight, right before the meeting, was the fact that Finance met last week and there were a number of concerns relative to performance measures or metrics. And so we held it up for a week to give the Homeless Task Force an opportunity to look at and evaluate what some of those performance indicators might be. And they are incorporated into the resolution that Administrator Leonard and Corporation Counsel Pruner prepared summarizing the discussions. But the amendments deal with capacity and some of the issues relative to trying to separate men and women and based upon diagnosis if there's a mental illness. They deal with the issue of trying to make sure that they're coordinating with wraparound services and support services. There's provisions in there basically calling for the establishment of term limits with the thought that people would be allowed to stay X number of days as long as they are enrolled in programs or seeking treatment. It may be educational, it may be job-related, but that we didn't want to make this an ongoing benefit. And those provisions are in there. We wanted to make sure, again, that they're working with other community services. And if you look at the La Crosse model, their healthcare component is heavily involved in case management, and there's a need to deal with it, and we want that included in here. We also didn't want to make this an ongoing commitment, so we're asking for them to have a plan for sustainability beyond December 31st of 2026, so the county can pull out with its financial support. The resolution before you today deals only with 2025. The funding, any funding for 2026 would have to be done as part of the budget. I think that we recognize that there were some, some limitations with the original resolution and not clear expectations, but the hope here is, again, that we can model it after the La Crosse model, look at bringing in the services to support them, and those are services that the county provides, again, through social services, through North Central Healthcare, it may be ADRC, it may be veterans, it may be a number of other sources to help those individuals move on beyond homelessness into transitional housing or permanent housing on a long-term basis, but to deal also with some of those underlying issues that keep them in that homelessness cycle. So I think we're hopeful that as the task force continues to work on their long-range goals and their final report, that those issues will be addressed, but it will take time, and this is an effort, again, to direct administration to work with the city on developing the request for proposals that would incorporate those provisions.
Vice Chair Dickinson, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate your responses. My concern is not, well, I do care about the homeless people. So I want that to be very clear. And the people who need the care are the people who we are trying to identify, the disabled, the substance abusers, right, and a couple other of those categories. I get that. I do realize there probably are some people coming from the rural communities here. I also recognize that Wausau is part of Marathon County. My concern is in the approach to give us a paper last week, which then got pushed back, and now to give it to us again and say this is so emergent that we must act tonight. We extended the task force till April 1st. So there's an opportunity in March to make a decision that we can take some time and we don't have to do it tonight. When you give us a document that has a lot of changes in it. And I think that's very important. It was just mentioned that this won't extend beyond 2025. The chair of HR Finance mentioned that. However, in the document, it talks about in the budget of 2026, we're going to consider this. And then the plan is to go well and beyond, I think it's 3030 or 3031, where we would fully be divested from this. If you drop the domino today, you're just going to continue to dominoes through that. And we don't know what the costs are. So one of the questions I have is, within this $200,000 or whatever money's coming next year or beyond, what are the costs outside of that with the other programs and services? Are we asking the county health department to step in? Are we asking veteran services to step in? Are we going to be using their budget to help with these people as well? Or is this money that we're directing right at this point, is that going to help those people? And I think that's significant that we ask that question. And it doesn't, again, it's not about whether we care about the homeless or these people and these individuals. It's about making the decisions that are proper with the taxpayer money to do the things that are necessary. Another question that then comes up beyond whether the programs or services of others are going to be used is, will the task force be extended? If you haven't decided on an RFP, if you haven't had that, if you don't have a decision made by April 1st, which you won't, are we then going to be coming back in March to extend the task force again? So I appreciate all the hard work, I really do, and I think it is something, very honestly, that we do need to address. But you're asking me right now to just say, well, just do it now because just trust us. I'm not in a place to say that. Thank you.
Chief Barnes, some of those questions were targeted to you. Is there any objection to having Chief Barnes answer some of those questions and provide some of that feedback and information that is being sought? Any objection? Without any objection, Chief Barnes, please.
So I can't speak to what the longevity of the task force is going to be. I certainly hope that it doesn't need to be extended again. I see the work that needs to happen. One of them is exigent, and the question I'll address first is, why do we need a decision right now, and why can't we put it off a month? Because Catholic Charities, that provides the Good Shepherd shelter, which provides our 365-day-a-year sheltering, emergency shelter, is not funded after May 1st. So as it sits today, there's no guarantee that we have shelter on May 1st. So to produce an RFP is not an incredibly time-consuming thing, but my preference would be, I've been tasked with putting together an RFP on behalf of the city. My hope is that the county participates and makes sure that things that they feel are important measurables or benchmarks are met, and they're actively involved in that RFP. You will see some of them in this notice. But if the county is not committed to funding, then I will have to do the RFP by myself, and the city will have to go it alone, and there won't be as much funding to be able to address those robust resources. If someone watches the presentation from La Crosse that came up here, members of their city and members of their county, they address two things. One, they presented to us their Pathways Home program, which I found to be one of the better programs I've seen that I think has a likelihood of success for positively impacting the homeless issues that they're dealing with. The other thing that they highlighted was the value that they found in starting to move the needle once they had a successful partnership addressing homelessness between the city of La Crosse and the county of La Crosse. So there is exigency. I see the fire right now that needs to be put out before we figure out what we're going to do next is establishing stable emergency shelter with someone that is willing to provide a proposal, and we accept their contract, that addresses the things we learned over the last 2 years in just providing emergency shelter. It didn't have benchmarks, which you will see in this resolution. It didn't have accountability for the individuals receiving that shelter as a component of it. I have learned, I'm the de facto person on staff with the city that deals with the homeless issues. Didn't volunteer for that, but I've been told, if not you, Matt, who? And our staff have to deal with that population on a daily basis. And one of my takeaways, which I think you'll see in this resolution, is that I don't support resources for the homeless community that enable them to stay in homelessness. I'm very supportive and think everything that's funded in the resources should empower them to leave homelessness. And what you see in front of you as a resolution, I believe, and what would be included in that RFP is to empower people to leave homelessness. And if they don't, and they're not willing to avail themselves of those resources or that programming, then at that point in time, shelter services are not for them, because the shelter services are to help people leave homelessness. So that's probably half of your questions. But the second step is to establish with county staff and city staff, ideally, a long-term strategy that involves partnering and leading for our nonprofit organizations or non-governmental organizations, as well as city staff and county staff, to establish a robust, thoughtful, and successful program. La Crosse presented one to us. I don't think it's just cookie cutter. We take theirs and change the names from La Crosse to Marathon County or La Crosse to Wausau. But there are good things in there, and we use that as a template and customize it to what our particular needs are. And what I really struggle with is decisions that might lead us back to where we were, which was encampments throughout the city of Wausau, encampments even that were outside the city of Wausau, tents underneath our bridges. And the fact that the city funded 365 Shelter previously allowed me to have our staff hold their head high when they're removing encampments with the Parks Department, and people say, well, if I can't be here, where can I go? And then we would take them to shelter. If we don't have shelter services here, I'm really terrified at what things are going to look like when there isn't a place for them to go. Thank you.
Administrator Leonard, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll just offer a couple of pieces of information. I think Vice Chair Dickinson raises good questions about one thing that was already in your agenda that you approved. You know, what does that long-term plan look like? By virtue of adopting the work plan, the administration work plan, you directed me to, it's on page 312 of your relatively short 317-page packet, to work with city staff to develop that long-term strategic plan to address homelessness. I think the Vice Chair also raises good questions. You know, what about the funds that the county already directs to various departments that do interface with the homeless population? Because one of the things I want to make very clear, and I made very clear to the city several months ago when I attended one of their meetings, was we do a lot. We have a lot of programs. They were already referenced. You know, whether it's our Veterans Office, our Parks Department, our Social Services Department, North Central Healthcare, and I can go on, but I can just direct you to a link where I made that presentation to the city. We do a lot of those things interfacing with that population. I think the idea that you'll see, and I don't have the long-term plan done yet, but like Chief Barnes referenced, we have a lot of good information from other municipal and county partners, is the opportunity that exists is really to coordinate those services and their delivery based on the specific challenges that exist within the homeless population. If you were delivering mental health services to someone like myself with housing, with transportation, not worrying about food insecurity, my ability to avail myself of those services and programs is fundamentally different than a homeless population. So that long-term plan, I think, to the vice chair's point, is absolutely that. I know, I have to start preparing your budget already that I have to deliver to you. I know there's not new money coming, not substantially, a large substantial amount of new money. We need to do better with the funds we have. And the homeless task force discussed that exact idea of, what is the long-term, one component of that long-term plan? And it's stated in this, I tried to capture it with Mike in the resolution from that discussion. The county does not see a future in funding shelter long-term. That is it's on the second to last, it's the last, be it further resolved, that, the whole point is that they need to work to be sustainable without county funds. Because the county, to Vice Chair Dickinson's point, already puts a lot of funding into the various services. That's the county government role. It's working to coordinate how those other players, those stakeholders, as was referenced by Task Force Chair Cavelli, the nonprofits and the business community, how to coordinate so they fill their area and the county doesn't have, for lack of a better term, scope creep into those other areas. Because that is absolutely a fear. That's my fear as an administrator with anything. I am the first person in line to say, hey, not everything is government's job. We have mandated areas where we need to work. We have discretionary areas where the board empowers us and directs us to do things, but we get ourselves into a difficult place when we fill gaps that, one, don't exist, or don't challenge others to fill those gaps. So I think there's very good questions. The RFP process that was alluded to, there's good bones to that. And there was a question at HR Finance today that was a very good question about, well, if you commit funds now in 2025, do you commit funds in 2026? And I think that was already addressed. The 2026 budget process, you'll have that ultimate determination as you do every year. But even in 2025, one of the things that I would pursue, and we started, I think we're getting better at this with every contract we work on, is to give the county the most flexibility it can have relative to getting out of contractual obligations. So the question was asked at HR Finance, what might that look like? So I'll give you the same information I gave them. Through that RFP process and the contractual negotiations that would follow, I would seek to include a provision, and again, this is a negotiation, but seek to include a termination provision of the existing contract, even in 2025, around 3 pillars. The first is termination for cause. To the chief's point, there now is this idea to include in this RFP and the ultimate contract performance indicators, capacity, separation by gender, mental health needs, substance abuse need, and all the other things you see. Those key performance indicators, so for cause, termination, which you provide notice, they have the right to cure. If they don't cure, you can terminate. The second ability to terminate is an ability to terminate if the governing body, you, don't provide additional funding for anything to continue, which I think is always a very good provision to include. We include it as a standard matter, of course, in our contracts. And then the last one is a termination without cause with provision of sufficient notice. So if you think about any contracts you might have in your personal or professional life, something that says, hey, upon the provision of 90 days written notice, this this contract, could be terminated by any party with or without cause. So those would be some of the additional pieces that I would attempt, if you direct me to do so, through this resolution, I would attempt to work with the city to do that. But I tried to capture, as did Mike, the discussions at both the task force, and then there was the funding determination made by HR Finance. But I think, again, the direction I have, I know my long-term plan on page 312 where it says work with city staff to develop that long-term strategic plan. I'm not counting on it being a vast sum of new money. It's about taking the money we spend, whether it's through our North Central Healthcare, Social Services, Veterans, Health Department, Parks Department, Law Enforcement, our jail, taking those funds and using them perhaps a bit differently to make sure we serve that population. But I hear loud and clear that there's not new money coming from that.
Supervisor Robinson, please.
The county has a responsibility under 5142 of the statutes to provide emergency services to people with mental illnesses, which is, I think, one of the reasons why we're here. But I think what we're trying to do, and I want to thank Supervisor Crevelli, Supervisor Conway, and the task force for their efforts to bring together a proposal and develop that long-term plan. Is we're trying to look at ways that you can move them beyond the need for housing into you have the emergency housing, then you have transitional housing, and then you have permanent housing. I think the goal is to get people into that permanent housing so that they're in a safe place, in a permanent place, so that they're not in the system on a revolving door basis. The county provides services through the community, the Comprehensive Community Services Program, which a lot of that program is funded through state and federal dollars. And I think we need to maximize that. We have programs for veterans that are homeless. We do that. We are partners in the Community Partners Campus right now. We have Human Services, Social Service, and Health Department is there on occasion. North Central Healthcare is there trying to work with those people. Supervisor Crevelli referenced the $2.5 million that the private sector is putting in through services such as the Bridge Street Mission, through Hager House, Gospel TLC, Catholic Charities, and others. Community Partners Campus has brought on a caseworker to try to work with it. But they're all trying to break that cycle and to get some permanency. So we're dealing with these people and we're providing an opportunity to advance beyond being unhoused and homelessness. And we have responsibilities. We are providing many of those services. I know that in the past, Sheriff Billup and I have talked about the lack of housing has resulted in people breaking the law in winter so that they can come to the jail and be housed because they get a shelter and they get meals. That's not a situation that we want to be in. We don't want to, on May 2nd, all of a sudden have the encampments or the individuals located along the riverfront. I think we want to provide some certainty to them and to the community itself. That's what the proposal is. It's part of a long-term plan and to try to address this problem holistically.
Supervisor Zhang, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have a question for need for clarification, probably from Chief Barnes here. The $200,000 that we're contributing here, are we setting any? And this is me putting my nonprofit hat on as in regards to grants specifically here. Are we setting any limits on indirect funds and where they can spend this money on? Because I know that there are some nonprofits that typically budget in indirect funds, and it could be anywhere as high as 40% here. So I want to make sure that the money that we're providing is directly impacting folks that needs it rather than going towards administration costs specifically here.
That's a tough one for me to answer right now. I know that that I think the ask right now for these dollars from the county would be spent in a contract with a provider to provide shelter with the parameters that exist. I think there are administrative costs with with any organization that you contract with, but what percentage of their costs are administrative or oversight or benefits? I can't speak to that.
Yeah, and I just want to reemphasize again that I just want to make sure that the money, the vast majority of the money will go towards services and not really focusing on administration costs. I know that there is a need for it, but I don't want it to be overly charged towards that indirect cost. So just want to provide that input as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Administrator Leonard, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To your specific question, Supervisor Zhang, that general idea of ensuring that costs associated with the provision of services really be for just that provision of services. We tried to get at that discussion that was had at the task force in the second to last, be it further resolved paragraph that requires essentially the billing for actual costs associated with the provision of services. I think it's a good idea to ensure that, and we can put in the RFP that any submitter will have to include an administrative overhead allocation. I've done that in other RFPs, so I can make note of that. But the idea, the requirement is that, at least at this point in the release of that RFP, we would seek to require the billing for actual costs with a not to exceed cap as well, so that if in fact the cost to provide the service is less than the not to exceed amount, it still is capped at that billing for services, whereas the converse is not true. If their actual cost exceeds the cost not to exceed amount, whoever the provider is would not receive funds beyond that cap.
Mr. Chair, can I add a comment?
Go ahead, please.
Because typically with with state grants as well too, they have anywhere limits from 10% to 30% for indirect. I know that some other entities apply for grants up to as high as 40% for indirect for the cost, and that's fairly high. But I would, like I said here, I would love to just see to make sure that the majority of the money tend to go towards services, maybe not even to exceed 20% or something along that lines there. But typical, in my experience with working grants, nothing, the limits that's set by the state, especially when it comes to state grants and funding or funding sources, contracts doesn't exceed 10% here. So I'm hoping that we could put that into consideration as we prepare these RFPs to be sent out for RFPs. Thank you.
Yep. Certainly, we can made a note already about that, and my personal experience, the last one I looked at for where we did require overhead submission as part of their budget, it was 12%. So I understand. Thank you.
Vice Chair Dickinson, please.
This is my third time, so I think I'm done here. I do want to thank Chief Barnes, Administrator Leonard, Ron, and John for the information that they've provided. And again, I'll state it like I said before, I'm really not against this, but I think the questions need to be asked, and so I appreciate the information that's been given. I will make one comment about the 5142 statute. That's about providing emergent services and taking care of people like the disabled, mentally ill, and all of that. If we haven't been doing that since this statute's been in place, then how come we haven't been sued? I mean, we have been doing that to a certain degree, so let's be careful about saying we have to have a shelter in order to meet that statute, and that's just the argumentative side of me coming out. The last question I would have comes down into the money. Wausau made the decision at the end of 2024, I think, to put in $200,000. Was that the end of 2022 or 24? I'm sorry. Thank you. 400,000 over 2 years. Okay. So the question is do we know if that was intended to start January 1, or was that intended to start after the Catholic Charities? Because as we look at where the money is being, as we're looking at this amount of money, is that to start May 1, or, is that too much money? And I see Chief Barnes is ready to answer. I have no problem with their answering.
So I have a little bit more flexibility with that money than Administrator Leonard is asking for in this resolution for him. So I have the ability to put out RFPs to provide night shelter, which is what we're talking about here, to utilize those funds for day shelter, potentially, if we feel that that's a need. Transportation-related issues, case management-related issues, transitional housing-related issues, all associated with the unhoused population. So I think the city council has a desire to see that needle move farther in resources to get more positive result than just night shelter, but that's clearly an expectation that goes with that. And it authorizes us to spend up to that. There's no requirement that all of those dollars be spent. And I think the ask is for the county to meet us halfway and partner. So we're not just going to spend money because it exists there. From my standpoint, it has to move the needle and it has to make a difference in our community with those dollars.
Supervisor Marash, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So sometimes when we put out RFPs, we don't get answers, or we only hear from one, and I'm curious if we know if we will have any providers answer the RFP, and if you have any idea who that would be. Thank you.
Chief Barnes, please.
Currently, as far as emergency shelter goes, there's one organization that's providing that in Wausau or in Marathon County, and that's Catholic Charities with the Good Shepherd Shelter. There are other organizations that potentially have capacity to do that are more focused in the transitional component, after emergency shelter, moving to something more permanent with services. I don't know who's going to respond or not. I've had other organizations that have expressed interest and asked questions about that. I think it's a giant lift and a giant burden to be able to provide those services. I'm confident in my communications with Catholic Charities that we'll receive a proposal from them, and they have been providing that service here. I also leave open the potential and possibility that it would be beneficial for this community to, instead of having one really large one, you might have two different providers that provides more stability for that, and maybe in like the different strokes for different folks concept that, one shelter might be focusing on people with these particular issues or challenges, and another shelter might focus on other issues. That all remains to be seen with what type of proposals we receive and from whom.
Administrator Leonard, please.
I was just going to add the same point that Matt just did, which is we would draft the RFP. I think your point, Supervisor Marash, is a good one. Try to get as many proposals as you can. You offer the opportunity for proposals to address partial aspects of the proposal. So perhaps it's not 60, but you'd offer it in a way that could entice individuals, or I should say entities, to respond saying, I will meet these needs within the proposal, and perhaps you go the route of having two.
Okay, any other questions? Any other discussion? Is everybody clear on the motion? The motion is to approve the recommendations for service to include consideration of potential funding source from the contingency fund coming from HR Finance. It does require a 2/3 majority vote. Resolution is 12-25. Seeing there's no other questions, we'll proceed to vote. Supervisor Rosenberg was aye. Thank you. And we'll proceed. And the motion is carried, but is not unanimous. Thank you. And we are down to announcements and or requests. I do have an announcement from the clerk, and this is a repeat of the announcement from last Thursday. If you have not yet replaced your iPad, you're going to now have to call CCIT and schedule a time for you to get your iPad replaced and updated. And I'll give you that phone number again. That phone number is 715-261-6710. And just let them know that you're a county board supervisor and you need your iPad replaced and need to schedule a time. Supervisor Seibert, please.
Thank you, Chairman Gibbs. I went through that process yesterday, and that's the wrong telephone number.
Well,
They told
that's the
me
help
that's
desk.
the wrong telephone number that I called, so.
That's the one you have to call.
It's,
They'll forward you, but we can't give out any other number.
they will forward, they're supposed to forward you, that's the IT help desk, and they're supposed to forward you internally in the staff.
Okay.
It's right.
Also, there is going to be a presentation. Lance, if you would, please.
I believe we'll send out details via email, but the Bridge Street Mission and the Grand Theater are working together with some other community partners to offer the opportunity for the Wausau City Council, as well as the Marathon County Board of Supervisors and others, to attend a showing of a documentary, Americans Without an Address. Supervisor Felly, is that right?
With no address.
Americans with No Address, on the night of your voting meeting next month, so March 25th, I believe, with an anticipated start time of 7:30. I was hoping to have confirmation that that was all set up. I believe it is, but I will send out, should I get that, and through the chair, send out an email with those details. But if you want to hold time after your meeting, 7:30 at the next voting meeting.
Okay, any other announcements and or requests? All right, we are down to motion by Supervisor Lemmers, seconded by Supervisor Call to adjourn. All those in favor of adjournment signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? We stand adjourned. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.